On the evening of November 10th, 1993, police found a car abandoned on the Newport Bridge. The engine was running, the lights were on, and on the seat were neatly folded clothes and 80 pounds of strap-on exercise weights. To the state of Rhode Island, this was the final tragic act of convicted murderer Adam Emery and his wife, Elena, a desperate suicide pact to avoid prison. But the discovery of Elena's remains and Adam's perpetual absence introduced a chilling new possibility. The question is not just where Adam Emery is, but if he convinced his wife to die to buy his freedom, making him a murderer twice over. The unsettling stillness of that abandoned car, its engine running and headlights cutting through the night haze above the Narragansett Bay. It was the latest, most dramatic twist in a saga that had gripped Rhode Island for years. Long before the mystery of the bridge, the story was one of explosive, senseless violence. The local community first absorbed the shock through the headlines in the Providence Journal that screamed of a respected man, Adam Emery, being charged with murder. The news captured the local anxiety, questioning the sheer rage that could turn a simple fender bender into a deadly, fatal stabbing. To understand the scope of that rage, we must first understand what was lost. The headlines focused on Adam Emery, the man accused, but the true tragedy belonged to Jason Bass, a vibrant 20-year-old whose entire future was erased. He was more than a name in a police report. He was a young man with aspirations, with a favorite memory his family cherishes, a life that should have spanned decades. When the authorities first confirmed Jason's death to his parents, the sheer injustice of it was an unbearable addition to their grief. He was merely driving home, a single innocent moment in time that was brutally overwritten by a stranger's fury. That fury, Adam Emery claimed, was fueled by self-defense after his car was struck. But the investigation soon uncovered a truth that made Jason's death even more tragically absurd. Detective Hopkins meticulously detailed the forensic process, a careful matching of paint chips. The conclusive findings shattered Emery's defense. The vehicle driven by Jason Bass was not the one that had hit Adam's car. The man Adam had pursued, cornered, and stabbed was entirely innocent, a bystander in a case of mistaken vengeance. This single piece of evidence proved the core tragic flaw in Adam's justification from the very beginning. Adding to the shock of the senseless killing was the raw, emotional atmosphere that night. Detective Kevin Hopkins, an off-duty officer who lived just down the street, initially responded thinking he was arriving at a simple motor vehicle accident. Instead, he encountered a scene he would later describe as spooky and eerie, a feeling magnified by the warm summer night and the sudden, irreversible presence of death. That initial personal proximity to the tragedy, not as an investigator called in later, but as a neighbor drawn by the chaos, forged an unbreakable personal investment for Hopkins in the years of investigation to follow. The case finally moved to the courtroom, culminating on November 10th, Adam Emery's 31st birthday. The camera focuses on the tension on Adam's face as the word guilty was read, a verdict that meant 20 years to life in a state penitentiary. Then came the agonizing, pivotal moment. Despite the murder conviction, the judge made the crucial decision to allow bail pending formal sentencing. This judicial choice, meant to respect a legal formality, gave Adam the one thing he desperately needed: freedom, and the time required to initiate the scheme that would change everything. Just 30 minutes after leaving the courthouse, the Emerys arrived at a local sporting goods store. Store manager Joel Smith later recounted a deeply unsettling scene. Elena was reportedly calm, even smiling, but the items they bought, sweatsuits, athletic socks, and critically 80 pounds of strap-on exercise weights, were anything but casual. The purchase was a checklist for sinking, a chilling detail investigators would later seize upon. Yet Adam, facing life in prison, was reportedly fussing over the total bill. Why concern yourself with money if you plan to be dead by nightfall? The unsettling questions surrounding the purchase only deepened an hour later. Witnesses reported seeing Adam and Elena not preparing for a final desperate plunge, but sitting calmly at a fast food restaurant. They were observed dining normally, composed, indifferent to the life sentence Adam had just received. This psychological anomaly suggested a terrifying clinical detachment, not the spontaneous despair of a suicide pact. It hints at a couple following a script, a plan that required them to maintain normalcy, a plan that perhaps Elena felt bound to by an unbreakable vow. The final pieces of the timeline only intensified the chilling question of deception. At 4:45 p.m., the Emerys arrived at the Newport Bridge. Witnesses saw them on the walkway, two figures against the vast backdrop of the bay, only to see them drive away at 5:15 p.m. Why the sudden retreat? The investigation revealed they returned 2 hours later, setting the stage for the final act. This double visit suggested a calculated reconnaissance, a practice run, or a deliberate timing delay. It was evidence of a scripted scenario, far removed from the desperate, spontaneous finality of a true suicide. 2 hours after their second departure, at 7 p.m., a bridge supervisor and a state trooper discovered the vehicle. It was blocking a lane, engine running, headlights on. This was the final, meticulously placed clue. The unsettling stillness of the abandoned car parked 219 feet above the dark, cold water of the Narragansett Bay. On the back seat lay neatly folded clothes, up front, cash, and cut-up credit cards. A powerful visual declaration of their total, permanent disappearance. Authorities immediately launched an exhaustive search, but what the churning waters refused to yield only deepened the mystery. The search for Adam and Elena Emery was one of the most extensive ever mounted in Rhode Island history. Divers combed the deep, murky passages. Boats crisscrossed the bay for weeks on end. Yet despite the massive effort and the certainty implied by the abandoned car, the vast water offered up nothing. Not a shoe, not a wallet, not a single piece of human remains. The absolute lack of evidence only reinforced the investigators' growing, chilling suspicion. The bodies were not there, and the entire scene was a meticulously planned hoax. It was Detective Hopkins, the same man who'd witnessed the eerie aftermath of the original murder, who finally pivoted the investigation away from the bay. He remembered a detail from the day of the verdict, a seemingly innocuous, taped conversation between Adam and Elena in the courtroom. Could a secret have been hidden in plain sight? Hopkins believed the answer lay not in the deep water, but in the couple's quiet exchange, a conversation that held the key to their relationship and perhaps their potential escape plan. Detective Hopkins brought the tape to a hearing-impaired expert, initiating a long, painstaking process. Hours of replaying the silent, tense footage finally yielded a breakthrough, a moment of chilling clarity. The lip reader interpreted Elena's final promise to her husband. "We're going to do what you originally said you promised me." This single line of key witness testimony became the documentary's core, haunting question. What was that original promise? Was it a pact for mutual suicide, or a cold, calculated commitment to a plan that would secure Adam's freedom? To investigators, the answer to that question began to coalesce around the most bizarre item on their shopping list: the 80 pounds of strap-on exercise weights. A forensic expert could detail the chilling, rational logistics. These weights were purchased to ensure a body sinks quickly and remains deep beneath the surface, making recovery virtually impossible. The purchase was not random. It was a highly specific piece of equipment for staging a fatal plunge. It transformed the shopping trip from an oddity into a horrifying premeditation for apparent suicide. With the bay empty and the weights explained, the focus shifted from recovery to the runaway theory. If the scene was staged, how did the convicted murderer and his wife exit the unsettling stillness of the abandoned car unseen? Investigators began to speculate on the logistics of a planned escape in the short window of the 2-hour gap. A waiting vehicle immediately off the bridge, a prearranged boat. Anything to provide the fugitive couple with a vital head start. The entire apparent suicide was now viewed as a calculated diversion, the final step in a commitment that Elena's promise had foreshadowed. Months after the search was called off, the vast, dark water of the Narragansett Bay finally surrendered a clue. It wasn't found by divers or police, but by a working fisherman. Tangled in his net were human leg bones, shocking proof of life, or rather, proof of death, emerging from the cold. The discovery tore a hole in the double escape theory. At least one part of the couple, despite the meticulously planned staging with the 80 pounds of weights, had remained in the water, setting the investigation on a new, grim path. The recovered bones demanded answers. Forensic analysts worked to extract DNA, comparing the sample to that of Elena Emery's mother and sister. The results were conclusive. The remains belonged to Elena Emery. This fact irrevocably shattered the theory of a double escape. Elena, at least, had met her fate in the bay, forcing investigators to reevaluate everything they thought they knew. But in doing so, they also sharpened the lingering question: if Elena was dead, where was Adam? Clinging to Elena's recovered leg bone was a tiny, fragile piece of fabric, a fragment of an athletic sock. This small scrap provided a definitive macabre link. Forensics confirmed it was identical to the socks purchased alongside the 80 pounds of strap-on exercise weights on the day Adam was convicted. It's a chilling detail that ties Elena's death directly to the chilling premeditation of that shopping trip, a cold, undeniable clue that her fate was sealed by a plan long before she jumped into the dark water of the Narragansett Bay. A few weeks later, the Narragansett Bay delivered a final grim confirmation. A skull, recovered from the East Passage, was positively identified as that of Elena Emery. Her fate was now solidified, marked by the terrible finality of the scattered remains. Elena had paid the ultimate price, a consequence, perhaps, of the original promise she made to Adam. Yet even with this discovery, the physical evidence was partial. Her entire body was never recovered, and there remained absolutely no trace of Adam. The discovery of Elena's skull introduced a darkest possibility, turning the case on its moral head. If Elena was dead and Adam was gone, what was the nature of their final moments? The community began to speculate on a horrifying scenario, that the convicted murderer, Adam Emery, had used the original promise to convince his wife to commit suicide, fully weighted by the 80 pounds of weights, while he himself escaped. It explored the chilling question of whether Adam committed a second murder of his own wife just to solidify the deception of his own freedom. The key to that deception lay in the meticulously staged timeline. Police worked to reconstruct the crucial window, the 2-hour gap between 5:15 p.m., when the Emerys were seen driving away from the Newport Bridge, and 7 p.m., when the unsettling stillness of the abandoned car was finally discovered. This window was too long for an immediate jump, but it was just enough time to execute a calculated plan. Drop a weighted Elena into the Narragansett Bay and transport a now solo Adam away from the area, giving him the critical head start to vanish. But how does a man go from an ordinary citizen to a convicted murderer and a suspected fugitive in a matter of months? Adam Emery's life before the murder offered few clues. Friends and acquaintances described a man who had never been in trouble, a seemingly respected member of his community. The violence on that summer night was an explosive, sudden shift, a moment when his entire life's trajectory was fundamentally altered. It was one violent act, born of a lie, that initiated a devastating unraveling, leading him straight to the Newport Bridge, and perhaps beyond. Further evidence of a meticulously planned evasion was found inside the abandoned car. Cash, and more tellingly, cut-up credit cards. Financial crimes experts viewed this as a clear signal of total finality. A couple truly bent on suicide would have simply left the cards, but a fugitive duo needed to eliminate all traceable evidence, to burn the financial bridges that could connect them to their past lives. This calculated move was textbook for someone intent on securing a new, untraceable identity, proving the staging of the unsettling stillness of the abandoned car was more than just a gesture. As the evidence mounted, from the cut credit cards to the discovery of Elena's remains and the absence of Adam's, the investigation escalated. It could no longer be treated as a simple suicide case. Prompted by the official belief that Adam Emery was alive and had successfully faked his own death, the FBI officially entered the hunt. The search transformed overnight from a passive recovery operation in the Bay to an active interstate and international manhunt. A convicted murderer was now a fugitive, and law enforcement prepared for a search that could span decades. But the time Adam chose for his vanishing act gave him a crucial edge. In 1993, the world was less connected, lacking the omnipresent digital trail of the modern era. Investigators faced the reality that Adam, if he survived, had the advantage of an analog world. To live off the grid, then, required a commitment to cash and anonymity, a deliberate severing of all ties. Could he have completely shed his past, escaping the reach of the FBI simply by moving quietly through a system that didn't yet track every keystroke and credit card swipe? For the local community, the financial aspects of Adam's freedom became a searing point of contention. Local citizens questioned whether the Emerys had cleverly secured their financial future before their disappearance. The bail money and property put up for Adam's release, should authorities have moved immediately to seize those assets? The delay led many to suspect a deep cynicism on Adam's part, that he had used the legal system itself to ensure he retained enough wealth to fund a new life. A financial crime compounding the tragedy of Elena's body, weighed down by the 80 pounds of weights in the bay. Investigators knew that the Narragansett Bay was a powerful, unforgiving environment. Forensic pathologists analyzed the currents, the temperature, and the depth. Their conclusion was grim. After months of relentless searching, the probability of finding nothing suggested Adam Emery was never there. The consistent absence of his body, despite the recovery of Elena's remains, became a deliberate strategy for his survival. A strategy meant to confirm his death to authorities, while he, the convicted murderer, embraced a new life. Surviving as a fugitive isn't just about escaping, it's about endurance. Psychological specialists began to analyze the unique resilience required for a long-term vanish. They posited that Adam Emery's rigid, unremorseful nature, the same traits apparent during the trial, might actually prove advantageous. This cold detachment would allow him to live under constant pressure, to seamlessly maintain a false identity, and to stomach the chilling realization that his freedom was bought with his wife's life, a price Elena may have foreseen when she uttered that original promise. Despite the decades that followed his disappearance, the FBI never truly closed the file. Their long-term projection is clear. Fugitives eventually make a mistake. The human need for contact, the corrosive pressure of loneliness, the slow decay of caution into complacency. These are the common pitfalls that law enforcement bets on. They believe that somewhere Adam Emery is living under a shadow, knowing that the ghost of his past, paid for with the 80 pounds of weights and the fate of his wife, will ultimately lead to his capture. For the Bass family, however, the fugitive case is a continuing, profound injustice. The man who violently ended Jason's 20 years of life was convicted, yet he escaped the consequences of that conviction. Adam Emery's vanishing act, his calculated freedom, created a second enduring pain, the lack of closure. They can see the tragic finality for Elena in the waters of the Narragansett Bay, but they are forced to live with the grim, lingering question of whether their son's killer is still out there, simply breathing. The entire mystery is anchored to a single imposing structure. The Newport Bridge, a majestic monument spanning the Narragansett Bay, became the stage for this great American unsolved case. Standing 219 feet above the dark, cold water, its sheer height reinforces the terrifying finality of a jump, or the audacity of a staged disappearance. It is no longer just steel and concrete. It is a silent witness, a colossal guardian of the secrets that were thrown into the deep, murky water on that November night. Years later, in 2004, Adam Emery was declared legally dead. It was a technicality of law, meant to bring a sense of closure to financial affairs, but it was a declaration contradicted by the persistent facts of the investigation. Law enforcement, the FBI chief among them, never accepted the bridge as his grave. They hold fast to the conviction that the man who purchased the 80 pounds of weights remains alive, living under an assumed identity. Legally a corpse, practically a fugitive. The question remains, does Adam Emery know he is officially a ghost? While Adam's status remains legally ambiguous, the tragedy for Elena Emery's family is terribly concrete. They endured the discovery of her remains, forced to reconcile the woman they loved with the person who died, weighted and alone in the bay. Beyond the public scandal and the escape plot, what was her private suffering? What were the promises she made to them? Their grief is compounded by the core, haunting, lingering question whether the original promise she made to Adam, the one that led her to the 80 pounds of weights and the dark water, was a bond of love or a betrayal of life. For decades, the FBI's manhunt has relied on the hope that someone, somewhere, knows the truth. Investigators have fielded thousands of tips, false sightings, misidentifications, and rumors that lead nowhere. But they wait patiently for a genuine break, believing that the weight of the secret, much like the 80 pounds of weights Elena carried, must eventually become too heavy for someone to bear. They are waiting for a confession from Adam himself, or perhaps an anonymous tip from an accomplice who helped transport him away from the Newport Bridge, a soul seeking final redemption. So where is he now? Creatively, one can only imagine the life of a man haunted by the lingering question of his wife's fate. He would be older, living under a carefully constructed assumed name, permanently relegated to the margins of society. He remains a ghost in the system, unable to trust anyone, forever looking over his shoulder for the face of Detective Hopkins or the flash of an FBI badge. His freedom bought at the bridge with the chilling execution of a plan and Elena's final original promise forces him to live a life of constant, suffocating solitude. But for the dedicated few, the hunt is not over. The case remains a living document of unsolved deception. Detective Hopkins will pull the official cold case file from the shelf, a file whose status is stamped unequivocally open. The final, lingering image is a close-up on Adam Emery's original photo, starkly contrasting the youthful face with the decades of evasion. It is a powerful, silent reminder to the audience of the lingering question at the heart of the Bay. A convicted murderer remains free, a ghost that walks among the living.